50 how to spot bad land in 60 seconds before you buy. Mud clings to your boot before you even notice it. Cold, heavy, quiet ground. You step down from the truck and the land doesn't greet you. It watches you. Somewhere past the fence line, water sits where it shouldn't. Not enough to see clearly, just enough to feel wrong under your weight. A man once told me, if it feels off in the first minute, don't argue with it. He walked 10 acres in 60 seconds, never took notes, never asked questions. Most folks miss it, all of it, the faint sour smell after rain. The way one corner of a field holds stillness too long, the tire ruts that don't bounce back right. And there's a number you should remember here. 60 seconds, that's all it takes for land to tell on itself, not loudly, quietly, like it thinks you won't notice. But once you learn it, you can't unsee it. If you've ever stood on a piece of land and felt something you couldn't explain, I want to hear about it. Not the sale pitch version, the real moment your gut spoke before your mind did. And if this kind of quiet, practical way of reading land feels closer to how you were raised, or how you wish things still were, then stay around. We talk about land the way older folks used to, slow, careful, and honest, no noise, just what holds up in real soil. I step down before the truck door even finishes closing. Boot hits ground, soft sink, just a little too much give beneath it. The land looks harmless at first glance. Open field, pale grass, a fence line running tired and uneven toward a low bend in the distance. But something sits wrong in it, not danger you can point at, more like hesitation in the earth itself. There's a kind of silence that feels natural out here. Wind, birds, distant road noise fading in and out. But this silence is different. It hangs too close to the ground, like the air forgot how to move. I've seen that before, and I've learned not to ignore it. Most people don't realize the first 60 seconds decides more than the next 60 minutes of walking property. Because your first impression isn't thinking, it's reading. The body reads before the mind argues. I noticed three things almost at once. Water sitting in faint tire grooves near the gate, a sour, earthy smell that lingers after the rain should pass, and a fence line that doesn't just lean, it rests like it has given up standing straight. None of it looks dramatic on its own. That's the trick. Years back, I watched an older man, quiet type, hands like old rope, step onto land like this without a word. He didn't walk forward right away. He stopped at the gate, just stood there, listening to nothing anyone else could hear. He said later, "Land tells you the truth before you ask." At the time, I thought it was just talk, but I remember where I was standing when he said it. Same kind of damp ground. Same kind of stillness that felt a little too complete, like something had been taken out of the air and never put back. What most buyers call peaceful is often just unfinished drainage, or soil that holds water longer than it should. But you don't learn that from charts. You learn it from weight under your boots. And here's the part people miss most. The land doesn't change its story for you. It just waits for you to notice it. I crouch down near the tire track without thinking. Press two fingers into the soil. It doesn't spring back clean. It lingers, holds the shape a second too long. Small detail, big meaning. But I don't jump to conclusions yet. That's how mistakes happen. One sign never tells the full story. Patterns do. Still, I can feel the question forming already. Not in my head, in the ground itself. And I know there are at least 5 signs like this hiding here, just waiting for someone patient enough to see them. Because this land hasn't spoken yet. It's only cleared its throat. The land doesn't speak louder the second time you look at it. It speaks clearer. That's what most people miss. They think inspection is about moving around more, covering ground, seeing it from every angle. But the truth is simpler. You don't need more time on the land, you need better attention in less time. I've stood on properties that looked perfect from the road. Flat, green, quiet in that postcard way. Then I take 10 steps in and the story changes. Not all at once, slowly. Like the ground is letting go of its mask in pieces. Water is usually the first thing to confess, not standing water you can see. That's too obvious. I mean the way the soil holds weight after a footstep, the way certain patches feel a half second softer, like the earth remembers rain longer than it should. You start noticing faint dip lines where runoff keeps choosing the same path. A neighbor of mine bought land like that once, said it looked clean as a church floor. First spring came, and half his pasture turned into slow-moving mud that never fully dried. He didn't buy bad land, he bought land that never forgets water. That's the difference. Then there's the road in. People almost never study it. They study the center of the property, the pretty part. But the access road tells you what your life will feel like every wet season. Loose gravel that shifts too easily. tire ruts that deepen instead of flattening, dust patterns that cling longer than they should after a vehicle passes. These aren't dramatic signs. They're quiet expenses waiting to happen. And trees don't lie, but they don't shout either. You look for patterns, not beauty. Clusters of growth, leaning in one direction like they've been pushed for years. Patches where nothing grows but weeds that don't ask for much. Even healthy looking trees can hide stress if you don't know what normal balance feels like. But here's where I need to be honest with you. None of these signs are perfect on their own. That's important. Because the moment you turn this into a checklist, you lose what actually matters. Land doesn't work like a machine. It works like memory, layered, inconsistent, full of exceptions. Still, patterns don't lie for long. And once you start seeing them, something changes. You stop trusting the first impression so quickly. You start walking slower without meaning to, pausing more, listening with your feet instead of just your eyes. I remember standing with that same older man again years later. Different property. Same silence. He didn't point at anything, didn't explain anything. He just said, "Most mistakes happen in the first minute because people rush past the truth." Then he finally stepped forward, not toward the best looking part of the land, toward the lowest point. And I didn't ask why, because I could already feel it too. Something about that ground didn't want to be ignored. And that's when I started realizing the real problem isn't what land shows you. It's what it keeps repeating until you finally notice it. The real shift doesn't happen when you learn more. It happens when you slow down enough to notice what was already there. Most people step onto land and start judging it like a house. Square footage, view, fencing, price per acre. But land doesn't behave like a house. It behaves like a record of everything that's passed through it. Water, weight, neglect, and time. That's why the first minute matters. Not as a trick, not as a rule, but as a filter your body can use before your mind starts negotiating. I call it a quiet scan. Nothing fancy, no tools, just stillness with attention. First, you feel the ground under your boots, not the look of it, the response of it, firm and even, or soft in uneven pockets that don't match what your eyes are seeing. Second, you watch where water wants to go. Even on a dry day, land remembers drainage, low paths, faint sinking lines, places where grass grows darker or thicker like it's feeding off something you can't see. Third, you notice refusal, spots where growth avoids, not dead ground exactly, just absence that repeats itself in patterns too clean to be random. I once stood with a man who never called himself an expert. He didn't carry papers or maps. He just said, "Give it a minute before you trust it." We stood on a parcel near a low ridge. Nothing looked wrong at first, but he didn't move, not for a full minute, maybe longer. At the end of it, he turned slightly and walked toward a section everyone else ignored. A shallow dip near the edge where brush grew uneven. He didn't explain it. He didn't need to. Later I understood why. That dip would have held water every spring, every single year, quietly, expensively. This is the part most listings never show you. Not because someone is hiding it on purpose every time, but because cameras don't feel slope. Photos don't carry weight, and words smooth over what ground refuses to smooth. There's a kind of language used in land descriptions that sounds right but says very little. Gently rolling, partially cleared, ready for development. None of it tells you how your boots will feel after a week of rain. That's where people get caught. And I want to be honest about something here. This method won't turn you into someone who never makes a mistake. It won't make bad land impossible to buy. It just shortens the distance between seeing and understanding. That's all. But that alone changes everything. Because once you start noticing what the ground is doing in the first 60 seconds, you stop buying stories about land and start reading the land itself. And when that happens, you're already ahead of most buyers who will spend months trying to fix what the first minute already told them. Now there's only one question left. There's a moment every buyer runs into sooner or later. Quiet moment. You're standing on good-looking ground. Nothing obvious is broken. Grass sits even. Fence lines hold steady. The price feels fair enough. And yet, something in you doesn't settle. Not fear exactly. Not logic either. Just a quiet hesitation that doesn't leave. I've learned to respect that moment more than any brochure or measurement. Because land can pass every visual test and still fail the body test. The kind you feel in your boots, not your head. That's where the 60-second scan becomes more than a method. It becomes a filter. Not to decide everything, but to stop you from being rushed into the wrong yes. You could combine what you felt underfoot, the softness, the hesitation in the soil, The places where water seemed to linger even when it wasn't visible. The refusal zones where nothing quite grew right. And you don't need perfect certainty, just consistency. If the same feeling repeats across those three signals, you slow down. Not walk away instantly, just slow down enough to ask better questions. I remember the old man one last time. Different piece of land again. Late afternoon. Light sitting low on the grass like it didn't want to leave. He stood there a long time before saying anything. Then he finally spoke, almost to himself. Good land stays honest under pressure. That was it. No explanation, no lesson, just that. And over time, I understood what he meant. Good ground behaves the same, whether you're excited or tired, whether the seller is talking fast or not talking at all. It doesn't change its answers just because you need them to be different. Bad land doesn't always look bad. It just changes how it behaves depending on who's looking. That's why rushing costs more than money. It costs time you don't get back. Seasons you can't redo. So here's the quiet rule I come back to. If it feels off in the first minute, give it more attention, not less. If it feels right, still test it the same way. No shortcuts, no assumptions. And if you ever find yourself standing on land that looks perfect but won't settle in your chest, don't argue with it too fast. Walk it again, slowly. Let it speak twice, because land doesn't change its truth for comfort. Only your attention decides what you hear. And if you've ever had a moment like that, standing on ground that looked right but didn't feel right, I'd be curious what you noticed first.